Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Francesca Gino, professor at Harvard Business School and author of Rebel Talent, Why It Pays to Break the Rules at Work and in Life. Francesca, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be here.
Fantastic. Well, before we jump in, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
As you said, I'm a professor here at Harvard Business School. I've been here for a long time, almost 19 years, left for 4 and had the opportunity to work at other universities and then come back in 2010. And a lot of my work comes from observing how we behave in the world. So I often spend time in organizations trying to pay attention to actions or behavior that seems to make a little sense. And then I do some of the research behind the scenes and write about that. And the hope is to bring it back to the practitioners with some lessons learned, but also some strategies that can help them approach the work a little bit differently. And that is clearly what I was trying to do with the new book. I'm also a mom, so I have 3 little children at home, which remind me every day about the power of staying curious. And I very much enjoy riding motorcycles. So I'm a
cool.
Ducati fan.
you got a Ducati? Is that what you have?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm too scared to jump on a Ducati. You know, I had a little 125 Yamaha for a while, but I was too scared on that one. So amazing. Well, fascinating. I'm so excited to have you on the show because I think that the topics that you research and that you write around is so relevant to, you know, the HR community and our listeners as well. It couldn't be more relevant, if I'm honest. What was the inspiration behind this book?
For many years in my research, I looked at people who break rules and end up with bad outcomes for good reasons. So people who cheat and steal and behave unethically. And what is it that organizations could do to avoid that or to nudge them in the right direction? And as I was working on this line of work, which was very much inspired by the big cases of corporate scandals from Enron and so on, I started paying attention to the fact that a lot of rule breaking in the world and in organizations was actually leading to positive outcomes. So people were driving positive change in organizations because they were breaking rules or they were doing things a little bit different. And that became my next project. And one of the stories that was quite inspiring to me comes from my native roots from Italy. And it was the story of a chef, Massimo Bottura. He owns a restaurant that is a 3 Michelin star restaurant that in 2016 became the best restaurant in the world. And the reason why I found this story fascinating is because he went to a context, traditional Italian dishes, and reinvented them. And so he became famous for his innovative spin on traditional recipes. And I don't know how much you know about Italians, but what is true for sure, at least 2 things. One is that there are lots of rules when it comes to cooking, from the way you pair certain type of pasta with certain type of sauces. And we also, second, cherish our old ways, especially when it comes to recipes that have been passed on for centuries. Yeah, exactly. So his story was a really interesting one and an inspiring one because he was able to go to traditions and then start asking questions. It is almost as if he approached tradition with curiosity and started saying, well, why is it that we cook the dish this way? Maybe it made sense 30 years ago, but not today. And so I was very much interested in that type of rule breaking, people who challenge the status quo and end up with something positive for the organization they work for.
Yeah, very interesting. And so when someone asks you, I'm sure you know, they say, what is rebel talent? How do you define that when someone asks you what rebel talent is?
I talk in the book about rule breaking as a constructive force rather than a destructive one. So rebels are people who challenge the status quo, who don't take things for granted, but approach life and work with curiosity. And in doing so, they create positive change.
In specific for this, what was it about the study of rebellion and conformity that interested you?
Part of it is that rebels fight against very common human tendencies. And so in studying the stories of rebels like Bottura and many others, I was finding myself reflecting a lot on my own behavior. For
Oh,
instance,
interesting.
I started asking questions about when is it that I'm the first to just nod my head and go along with what other people are saying or doing rather than standing out or making sure that I express my preferences or perspective and voice. Or where are the parts of life in my own personal life and also in my professional life where I just take things for granted. I go
Mm.
with the usual way of working rather than saying, does this make sense? And why is it that I'm following this procedure or this process or this way of doing things almost mindlessly rather than asking questions? And so I felt very inspired by the people that I had the opportunity to study, and looking at them and try to understand why is it that we're being successful made me reflect a lot on my own behavior. And so I thought that others might have the same reactions when learning about these rebels.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I was thinking actually when I was thinking about the book. Are they born or are they made?
Mm-hmm.
Are people born rebels and they've always been a rebel and that kind of, or is it something that a catalyst in their life or something that can create that? So what was your findings during the research?
That rebelliousness can be developed. In a sense, we all have the talents that I talk about in the book, and it's a matter of making sure that we bring those out. So you can think about perspective, which is one of the rebel talents. Perspective means approaching problems or situations not just from one angle, which is usually what we tend to do quite naturally, and it's usually from our own perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but stay open-minded, looking at problem and situation from all sorts of angles and perspectives. And so by learning about the power of bringing a broader perspective to our own decisions and our own work, at least I'm trying to still learn how to do that more reliably and more regularly in my own life. We can really work with these talents and develop them more.
Because I remember, if I think about from my own personal experience in my company as a sales director, I used to get in a lot of trouble for breaking particular processes or frameworks that were developed before me. And I would find better ways of doing it or more efficient, time-effective way because I wanted to maximize my output as a salesperson, right? So rather than doing it this way, I found a shorter route to achieve this. I can do the same amount of sales, but doing half the amount of phone calls, for example, or the same amount of lead generation and half the time. But I would get in trouble by my my global sales director because they'd look at the KPIs, right, and they'd say, Chris is generating more than everyone in the team, but he's in terms of sales numbers, but he's doing half the amount of phone calls. So in their head, they say, Chris, if you double your phone calls, you'll achieve. And I'm like, no. The reason that I'm doing that is because I've made my process more efficient. So I don't have to do double the phone calls, right?
Your story is just beautiful because it's a perfect example of what happens if you keep on going. What happens if you're a person who stay persistent and keep on pushing and showing others that change can be good, the breaking rules can be constructive. And in a sense, you're not an isolated case. If I go back to the story of Chef Massimo Bottura, when he opened his restaurant, tradition-bound Italians weren't too happy. They didn't want to eat there. He faced a lot of resistance. In fact, he talks about it as people fighting against him and wanting to see him dead because he was messing around with their grandmother's recipes. And so persistence is important. And what your story also suggests that is true of the rebels is that it takes courage to change.
Yeah.
And to be the one who's in the front line, showing others that the world can be better if we go into this in this direction. So I love your story.
How do we develop rebelliousness in our teams, in our people, even in our family? if we want to be brave enough to do that.
Exactly. So in my work, I identified 5 rebel talents. They are the talent for novelty, the talent for curiosity, the talent for perspective, the talent for diversity, and the talent for authenticity. And so often when I work with organizations or leaders or employees who are interested in developing these talents, I treat them separately. And so I say, okay, let's talk about curiosity, for example. As it turns out, we're all born with it. I have small children at home, and I can tell you that
It's kind of
constant
It's beaten out of
exploration.
us, right?
Exactly. Constant asking questions. Just the other day, my 3-year-old was asking, why is it that we need to wear clothes when we go outside? Why is it that we pay for things? And it's all this question that comes so naturally to us when we're little children, because we're approaching the world with a sense of awe and wonder. And so when I talk to employees, I often stress the importance of keeping our curiosity alive. So next time that you're at work, try to pay attention to the usual way of working. And rather than taking processes for granted, at least entertain the possibility of what if, or why is it that we're doing it this way? Or if you are more on the leader side, you could think about a very simple solution of raising curiosity is giving people the usual performance goals, but also giving them learning goals. That's actually quite important, and it's a way in which we can keep curiosity alive. So I always think about the simplest strategy that we can all use to make sure that we're doing better on that particular talent. So for perspective, I often tell people to think about the next meeting, and the intention being, I'm gonna walk in ready to ask questions to other people who I know are presenting a different view, and go almost in with the assumption that they're smart as you are, caring as you are, so that you are more motivated to try to understand where they're coming from. And if there is a disagreement, sort of say, I wonder why, given that they're so smart and caring, why is it that they have such a different view? And so coming in, basically staying open-minded. If there is the possibility in the meeting, or you're the person leading the meeting, plant a devil's advocate, the person who's going to be asking the challenging question. That, again, are very simple strategy to make sure that you're looking at a situation from very different perspective, which is difficult to do.
I was going to say that. It sounds easier. It's not as easy as it seems.
It's difficult to do.
Especially when you disagree.
Yeah, especially if you disagree, and especially if you're the person who have the most experience in the room. It's difficult to say, I'm going to actually listen to what others have to say. And if I were to think about authenticity, and again, we're in a meeting or in a discussion, I would tell people, despite the fact that others might be agreeing on something, make sure you speak your mind in a polite way, in a respectful way, but make sure that others get the chance to hear your ideas, because presenting your different opinion or different perspective will make the process and the decision better. So again, it's very simple strategy depending on the different talent that we're working with. When it comes to novelty, I tell people, be sure not to get too comfortable with the familiar and comfortable. Stretch yourself. Next time you're asked to work on a project and you feel as if it's a little bit stretching your skills, or that you might not ready for it, go for it. Good outcomes are going to happen. You're going to feel better about yourself, better about your skills, and you're going to learn, which is also great for the way we feel satisfaction out of the work that we do.
It's one of the things I love the most, and what I do is whenever I feel nervous or you know, something scary, running towards those things is just amazing. You know, it doesn't feel that way at the time, but when you achieve something after, this podcast is an example. I was terrified of launching this, speaking to all these incredible people. Who am I to be the host? You know, imposter syndrome, right? But now on the other end, I still get nervous even before this show today with you. Like, I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I, ask the right questions, and that Francesca gains value too. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to deliver. But I know on the other side, it's you feel so good, right? You build your confidence, you develop new skills, and in all walks of life, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, always try and push the boundary.
Absolutely. I remember a few years back, it was Christmas time at our house, and I had what I thought was the perfect gift for my husband. And my husband is a geek, so whenever I want to make him happy, just buy him the latest piece of technology or the latest gadget. And on Christmas Day, it runs upstairs, he's super excited, he finds the big box with his present under the tree, and when he opened it, at the very bottom, he found a card that let him know that I signed us up for a 10-week 2 hours a week course in improv comedy. So
Oh my God, it's terrible.
yeah,
I would literally be terrified. Oh my, that's like, I don't even know if I would be brave enough to do that. That is very, wow. What was his
my
reaction?
husband lost his smile right there, and I started questioning my judgment for good presents. And as it turns out, after the first 2 hours, he came to me and said, I hate this. Fortunately, we had 9 weeks to go, and his attitude actually started to change, and he really started to become excited to have this date with the unexpected every week. But it was amazing to see what happens to us as people when we stretch ourselves, when we're always put into situations where we're asked to do something new. That's
Yeah.
not what we would choose for ourselves, but as it turns out, it makes us feel good.
Yeah. But that's what I love doing. Once you realize that, now I choose to put myself in the situations all the time.
Right.
I actually I always say this on the show, and people are probably tired of saying it, but when I achieve the result, then I get upset because it's the journey I love, right? And then I'm like, oh, what's next, right? I was terrible at this, and now I've developed over this, and now I'm got to quite a high standard in whatever it may be, whether it's a sport, a particular skill, whether it's editing video, whatever it may be. And that's what keeps me going. Like, that's what is exciting to do and to get up, and rather than to sit there and watch TV, I want to do something. I want to be developing. I want this version of Chris to be a better version every single day.
Yeah. And you capture the essence of it when we do something new, when we go for something novel. That's where we end up growing. And so it's not only satisfying as a process, but we're also learning throughout that process. And so it's quite beautiful when we do that. And again, it's a very simple strategy. How is it that we can bring a little bit more novelty into the work that we do? And it might just be in the fact that we're changing up the routine a little bit rather than always doing and approaching work the same way every day. There is another really interesting, for at least to some people, when I talk about it, another strategy when it comes to the talent of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
The talent of diversity means really pushing back on the stereotypical judgment or the social roles that society often passes upon us. And so I often ask people to do an exercise that I did myself a year and a half ago. And so I say, think about the 5-10 people that you go to at work when you're looking for a second opinion, you want to brainstorm ideas, or you're just thinking through a decision. And write down the initial or their actual names on a piece of paper, and then go back to the names and give them a score using a scale from 1 to 5. 5 means that the person is very similar to you in your way of thinking. 1 means that they're very different. And so very quickly, just go through the list and assign a score.
It's all going to be 5, right?
It was for me, and
I'm
it was
sure.
striking. I had only 4 and 5s. And if we really want to be true to the talent of diversity and even to the talent of perspective, we need to be conscious of that. And we need to proactively add people who are more like 1 and 2. And that means adding people who are going to challenge you or going to think differently. And so in the moment, it might not be pleasant, but it's so much better for the type of decisions that we end up making and for the interactions that we're going to have as a result of that.
I love that. And again, it's such a simple thing for us to do, right? I love those sort of actionable things we can do straight away. And as soon as you said that, I was thinking about the people I go to, and I was like, oh God. I immediately thought, there's one actually who's very controversial, is someone who's a 1, but all of the other ones are all 4 or 5. So I know straight away. Yeah. Very interesting. And I've hired people now. I actually try to do that in my hiring now.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm hiring people, I try to hire people that are a 1.
That it's wonderful.
Because in the past, I used to hire people that were a reflection of me, and it's very easy for people to do that. And I'm sure many people listening also do that. You have the same type of personality, you have same interests, you've got a similar set of skills and thought process, but you need in terms of creating innovation, and obviously innovation through diversity is, I think, such a powerful thing as well. The innovation that comes from a diverse thought process and as well is so important. And I've been doing that more and more now. Some of our employees in this room couldn't be as far away as me as possible in terms of but it works, right? We don't always agree, but they bring something different to the table. And some of our best products.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And you need to be open to that type of diversity. I always tell people that diversity is an acquired preference. And sometimes people look at me and it was like, what? What did you just say?
Yeah, that sounds quite controversial, but I understand your context.
Exactly. And the reason why I'm saying that is that by bringing in more diversity in our networks, in our workplaces, in our lives, we're bringing in more discomfort, because we know that people are going to be likely to looking at situations from different angles, and there are going to be disagreements, there are going to be debates. But as long as we keep them healthy, they're good for us. But it's going to take a little bit of time to get
Of course. And it should feel that way.
Exactly.
That's the whole point. That's normal. I think people need to realize that that's healthy as well. And when I don't feel that way, then I feel like there's something wrong. I always say that to the team. I'm like, there needs to be that, conflict for when innovation happens as well.
Absolutely.
So, and that, nothing innovative came from being comfortable.
Absolutely.
It's just through that pain that it comes. When you mentioned you do some workshops as well, right? And you meet up with the teams. What are some of the other activities that you do with teams to try and stretch their own thinking and their mindset?
So there are a variety of different exercises, and again, I try to tie them back to the different talents. So sometimes I ask people to work on the talent of perspective and also curiosity. And so what I do is actually quite simple. So imagine we're in a group,
Mm-hmm.
and I ask people, I pick a person to talk about a problem or situations they're struggling with at work. And then the people who are not speaking, but they're there listening, they ask for them is to pay attention to what the person is saying. And then when it's their time to speak, to try to use expansive questions, to try to approach the situation with curiosity. And it's interesting that a lot of the questions that often people ask when they listen to other people are questions that have yes or no as an answer.
Not
Those
open questions, really?
Yeah. So those kill the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. As a salesperson, you'd never do that.
Yeah. And so part of it is helping people reframe question from a question that leads to a yes, no type of answer to how question that is more expansive. So if a person were to say, did you feel angry when that happened? You sort of
you killed it.
Exactly. And so you ask them to reframe the question. So that is now, what type of feelings did you experience as you went through this situation?
That's a very powerful question when you bring emotion into it. I love those type of questions. How did that make you feel is such a powerful question to ask someone in general, to be honest. Do some people still not get it and they end up trying to give an answer?
Exactly. So that's why it's important
to stop. We don't want answers. We want questions, the thought-provoking questions.
Exactly. So that they help the other person think through the problem in a different way. Sometimes in the spirit of novelty, I have people go through improv comedy type exercises. So it's powerful to make people experience the discomfort that comes with doing something novel. But then if you do multiple exercises in a row, they realize that they're becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable. And so rather than just saying it, as people experience it, it's a little bit better. And one of the exercises that I've done quite a bit, I ask people to stand up and to do an exercise where they work with a partner. So usually the person who's standing close to them. And then they ask them to face one another and for 20 seconds to stare at each other in the eyes. And do so without laughing, without talking, and without making any visual expression of emotion. And so they do that at first. And usually the reaction is, after the 20 seconds are over, people report being awkward, uncomfortable, all exactly the things I was going for. And then I ask them to do the same exercise again, but this time trying to pay attention to the other partner. So one of the beautiful concepts behind improv comedy is that we should try to shift the attention from us to the other person and make sure that as we try our best to make them feel good about whatever it is that they're doing. And so they do the exercise again, and they're now trying to pay attention to the haircut the person has or how their ears are shaped, whatever it is that they're paying attention to. And after that, I asked them to turn around. And so it's now their back facing the back of their partner, and think about 2 big changes that they can make on themselves. And so some people rough up their hair, some people take their jackets off, and then they turn around when they're ready and they need to guess at each other's changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great example of showing whether you were really paying attention, whether you were able to shift the attention from you to the other.
And they don't know you're going to say that, right? So
Exactly.
if they weren't paying attention, now, now you know.
Exactly.
I
And
love
there is
that.
a little bit of laughter with that. And then we do the final part of the exercise where I ask people to think about their favorite dance move. And then I'm going to give them the opportunity to show that to their partner. And the best part is reminding ourselves of what the partner is supposed to do. You're supposed to make the other person feel good, in this case about their dancing. And so you need to mirror and exaggerate what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then put some music on and people are dancing in front of their partners for a little time.
I absolutely love those type of things. And also, I guarantee that the first time that they had that face-to-face where they were staring at each other, the second time round, it was less uncomfortable.
Exactly. And in fact, when you ask them about how they felt dancing in front of a stranger or a colleague, they report feeling more comfortable than during the initial staring, which is exactly getting at the point.
It's a progression, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That we get comfortable with the uncomfortable as we keep stretching ourselves. Sometimes the pushback that I get from leaders is, well, I'm working in an organization and we really need to make sure that people execute on the work, they do it fast, they do it to excellence.
Mm-hmm.
But even in those contexts, there might be the potential to bring in a little bit of novelty. So for example, there is a fast food chain in the middle of Tennessee and West Virginia. They're called Pulse Sudden Service, and they're all about efficiency. In fact, they have amazing levels of performance, revenue per square, you name it. They beat the competition by far, and we're talking about the big brands.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have much fewer errors. So if at a place like McDonald's, you sometimes see an error in a dozens of orders, at Pulse Sudden Service, you see an error every 3,600 orders.
Wow.
And when you're in one of their stores, which are all drive-through, at rush hours, people are working really fast at their station. And so you might wonder, perfect example where the work might become monotonous or even boring. And having thought about this, the general managers find ways to inject novelties. So for instance, the workers move from station to station throughout the day. Yep. But you as a worker learn about the order that you're going to follow on a particular day when you show up for work. And so it's a little bit of unpredictability about how the day is going to go. Or the general managers have challenges for their people. So for example, one of the challenges for the person working at the window was if you can remember 100 orders in a row from repeat customers who tend to make the same order every time they show up, then there is going to be a special reward. And so it's a small ways of injecting novelty in a way that makes work a little bit more unpredictable.
In terms of the sort of rule breakers out there from history, what are some of your favorites that you've come across?
Yeah, there are really many of them. So one historical figure that I talk about in the book is Napoleon Bonaparte. And the reason why I do that is that he was a leader who was always in the trenches with his people. So in a sense, he was taking on roles that we wouldn't expect him to take, especially at a time where all of his colleagues were sort of guiding the battles from very far away. So he's one of the people I talk about as an example of a person who was breaking rule in a way that was actually quite effective. When I talk about curiosity, I talk about Harry Houdini. He got a really interesting past, and he's a person that since he was very little, he was experimenting, always trying to push himself and being curious about whatever tricks he had to learn or he wanted to learn, and always pushing himself to the next level. So those are some of the figures from an historical perspective that I talk about in the book that, again, were quite inspiring to me. And another one, it's more an organization. It's pirate ships in the 16th century. They were phenomenally interesting. At a time when it was 200 years before slavery ended in the United States, they were the most diverse organization on the planet. They were hiring people based on attitude and skills rather than gender or skin color. And what was also interesting about them is that the crew was in charge of electing a captain, but the crew could also take the captain off his throne or her throne if the captain was not behaving in good ways towards the crew. And so I laughed.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Considering
it is. And the most part to me that was interesting about that is that he left me with a question. That is a question that I am trying to remind myself of on a day-to-day basis, that I'm hoping leaders out there are going to ask more frequently. And it's the question of, am I the captain that my crew would choose as his leader today? It's a very humbling question. And I have to say that when I ask this question at work, in my own leadership position, sometimes the answer is, I'm not so sure, but then I am motivated to do better the next day.
Where do you think that we lose that curiosity? Kind of almost like beaten out of us at some point where it disappears, right?
Yeah, so if you look at the data, curiosity is something that peaks at the age of 4 and 5, and then it declines steadily from there. And I actually thought that when we enter our jobs or the workplace, that is a place where now we can bring curiosity back into business. And I was wrong. I collected data looking at people, hundreds of people starting new job across industries, across the globe. And what I found is that general curiosity is pretty high. But if you go back to the same people, 8-9 months later, curiosity had dropped at least 20% across the board. So it's a missed opportunity. And to me, what that means is that too few organizations really encourage curiosity in people. And you start your job, you get to learn what others are doing, the usual way of working, and you stop asking questions. And in fact, most people report encountering barriers to keep their curiosity alive in the day-to-day work. So part of what I was trying to do with the book was, let's change that. Curiosity is so important in our life and the work that we do. So let's make sure that we keep it alive and that we help leaders with concrete strategies to also encourage it in others.
Before we wrap up, I know on your website you also have a test that people can take, right? Can you explain briefly a bit about that, what that is for everyone before we wrap up?
Of course. So if people were to be curious about what type of rebels they are, there is a test called Rebel Test. Is free. It's on the book website. It's at www.rebeltalents.org. And it takes about 7 and 8 minutes to take. And after you take the test, you're going to receive some feedback about your rebel type and where is it that you can keep your attention going forward. And if people come out as pirate, it's a very good thing.
Hopefully, I haven't done it. I literally saw it just before this. So I haven't done it. I'm going to do it straight up. For everyone listening, make sure you go over there and do it. I will include the link in the description of this podcast for everyone to go over and do that. What one are you? What does your one come out as?
So I was the one creating the test, so I feel like
unfair.
I was cheating by taking it. But
you can game it. yeah. All right. So let's just call you. I think you're a pirate. Let's be honest. The fact that you wrote the test and the book, you're a pirate. Like that goes without saying, because you wouldn't have written it and created it in the first place if that wasn't the case. But look, I know you've got to run, so thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm really excited to read the book, and I'm sure everyone listening is also excited to both read the book and also implement some of those activities that you just mentioned with the teams. So it's going to be quite interesting to see which dance move comes out for everyone as well. Before we part ways, 2 questions. One, if you want to grab a copy of the book, where's the best place to do that? Is it on the website as well?
Yeah, so on the website, you're going to find different links in terms of places that sell the book. And I think that there are enough options for people's preferences. So if you like independent bookstores, you can go there. If you prefer Amazon, you can go there, and other options as well.
Fantastic. And if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you'd want to give to the listeners, what would that be?
Change your mindset. Rebelliousness can be good in our workplaces, but it also can be good for life. We get more joy out of what we do, both in our professional and personal lives, by bringing in more rebelliousness.
Fantastic. And then I know people are going to ask me if anyone has any questions for you personally, what's the best way for us to contact you?
So I am easy to find, and it's a genuine invitation. So on the book website, there is some contact information for me. And so people should feel free to reach out, to share their rebel stories or ask questions.
Fantastic. Well, look, for everyone listening, guys, if you head over to hrds.com, you'll find the show notes from the episode. Everything we've been talking about will be linked on the website. So link to the website, to the book, everything you need will be linked in the description to make life easy for you. But thank you so much again for taking the time out to join us. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you all the best with the rest of the book tour. And I'll send you over my details of the results of my question.
I'd love to see them. I'd love to see them.
I'll let you know
and
what they
thank
are.
you so much for having me and for helping me spread the message around the book.
No problem. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.